When Things Go Bang by Clive. People say I've been to Bhutan. I've been to Antarctica. And I say I've been there too. But I've been to a place more interesting than anything you've ever seen. It's called the past. Paul Theroux. 1. Fog pressed against the windows at bedtime. That October of 1959, I pulled the pillow over my head to muffle the sad doom of the Bell buoy, tolling miles away in the Mersey. Gug the barnacle man would be piloting his rotten hulk from Formby Light to the pier head, looking for lost people to Shanghai. Gug cruising slowly, his moonlight fingers searching. Oh God. I pulled the coverlet over myself. I'd be all right if the fog didn't get in, wouldn't I? Gug's boat, slimy green, shrinking to a toy, would float at sunrise into the filthy sewer intake under the pier head, taking its tiny, screaming cargo with it. That's what the story said of those who disappeared on the shore. Was it true? People had disappeared. That was true. Old Beardy, the Hightown hermit, might know, but nobody my age dared speak to him. I came across him once. There couldn't be two people like him. He stood taller than I, even bent as he was, like a silver birch on Formby Point, bent over the gales of the Irish Sea. The evening sun reflected orange off his specs, lenses like the bottoms of Lucozade bottles. He had on a school blazer like mine, weird for an old man with almost no hair. A piece of rope held up his trousers. His wrinkly neck reminded me of Granddad, and his nose got bulbous at the tip. I stared, fascinated and disgusted, and imagined the drip-drip. "Hey, boy! I know ye! I seen ye on the building site, I seen!" He waved a stick at me. I turned and ran. A stitch doubled me up. I clutched my left side, leant against an eroded lime brick wall, and panted for breath. That was the first and worst time. I'd not seen him more than a couple of times since then, always a long way off on the beach. Sleep wouldn't come. My thoughts spun out of control. The pendulum of the cuckoo clock seemed incredibly loud. I started humming, a stupid tune from my parents' radio station, the BBC Light program. Sing something simple, over and over, fill my head, and between cuckoo clock, tick-tock, I fell asleep. In my dreams, I was sitting on a grassy hill. For some reason, I couldn't move my head, but I knew that there was movement behind. It's there. It's waiting. No, Mummy. Don't turn the light off. The enemy is here. I woke up from the fading remains of the nightmare that had been repeating as far back as I could remember. The clock said nearly 8:30. I sat up and drew the curtain. The sun must have risen more than an hour ago, but the garden trees still swam in the murk. My friends, Dennis and Mervyn, were supposed to be at my house by 10. Den lived in Waterloo, a 10-minute walk from the Blundellstone station. Merv lived in Thornton, and took a bus to his nearest station, Waterloo. But would the trains be running in this fog? I doubted it. What a waste of Saturday. I had no friends in the village, and I hated being on my own. Once, I asked my dad why there was nobody my age. He said Hightown was too small, only about 800 residents, and their kids had grown up and moved away. I got up, washed and dressed. By the time that I came downstairs, Mum was already making breakfast. She put doorsteps of white bread under the gas grill and forgot them, as usual, and had to scrape the black parts off with a knife. Then she spread them thickly with New Zealand butter and passed them to me. I sat at the table and stared glumly at my cup of tea, brewed a while ago from the grayish-brown patches of scum. What I really wanted was beans on this toast. I stood up and headed for the pantry. "Just look at that fog," Mum remarked in her best Lizzie accent. She followed the royal family in the society pages and belonged in Buckingham Palace. "Yeah, Den and Merv are supposed to be here at 10. I couldn't find a decent opener, so I hacked the Heinz tin open with the crude wooden handle one Mom used on Doggle's dog food. "Please, James, we say Dennis and Mervyn. Did you wash that before you used it?" She made one of those faces at me. How else to describe it? People made these faces at each other all the time, but I didn't really understand why. She called me James when she was annoyed. She knew very well that I liked to be called Jim. "No, sorry." Doggle, Mum's Pembroke corgi, nudged the back door open, disappeared under the table, and began sniffing my leg. I moved, but he followed. Had to have the same kind of dog as the Queen. Of course the Queen had more, but Dougal was a large tricolour Pembroke corgi she bought from a breeder in Wales. "They're breeding them too small now," she said about the Queen's corgis. "Dougal had won prize at Cuffs. Best in breed. None of the Queen's corgis had." Did this mean that Mum was better than the Queen, at least in some ways? Dougal left my leg alone, but lay under the table watching my every move. I had trained him to wait for the gruesome fatty lamb and lumpy beasto that Mum served without fail every Sunday. For the other 6 days, Dougal must have thought that I was being mean. The radio, tuned to the light program, was playing band music from the war. I had been born just after it finished, and now I felt cheated, missing it. Evidence lay all around. Chopped-off houses in Liverpool, empty spaces paved in rubble. Dad had a pile of old photos of Egypt. In one of them, he stood in front of the pyramid with 2 of his army friends dressed in baggy shorts and rumpled tunic. He looked young, but now, 14 years after the war ended, everyone seemed old, like Nana. Her face had as many wrinkles as bags of prunes. Dad, who Mum called Eddie, came in, carrying a folded newspaper under his arm. He must have been down to the village newsagent. "I wrote to the Echo again, but they never printed it," Dad said. "Oh, about the excavator? Mr. P called earlier. Are you doing the flowers again next year? He wanted to know." Mum looked at me. "Are you burning those beans, James?" Mum and Dad talked about people using their initials to stop me from knowing who they were talking about. I know, though. I worked out who they meant long ago. Mr. P means Mr. Parr. He and Mrs. Parr live halfway up the close. I poured the Heinz baked beans on my toast. They slid out of the pan like molten lava. The tasty, crusty bits went on top. Paradise on a plate. The radio's dial light went out and the band music faded away. Good. Dad slapped the radio with the Liverpool Echo and the music came back, louder. "Yeah, about the excavator. Bloody fools are taking the dunes. The sea'll be through there one day. Then there's nothing left to stop it before Ormsmerk." He pulled his chair back out from under the table and sat down. "It just needs high tide and a good gale off the Irish Sea. But there's people round here who remember Artmouth." Mum gave him a look. "Oh." Dad reached up and took his grey Tilby hat. "The flowers? I should think so. I'd have to call Stan." My earliest memory of Dad was him chasing after just such a hat, perhaps the same one for all I knew, on the Waterloo beach. While he wasn't terribly impressive, many mistook him for the popular Liverpool comedian Arthur Askey. At least he was good-natured, which was more than I could say about my friends' fathers. So he and Uncle Stan would be doing the flower deliveries again next spring. That meant that I'd get extra pocket money for delivering leaflets. Hundreds and hundreds of gates open to drives to wake up, letter boxes to stuff. Later, I'd help with the deliveries. Boxes of phlox, antithrinums, lobelias, petunias. I could already smell the damp earth in wooden boxes. "Dad, what was that mouth?" "It was a village like this one, somewhere over the other side of the river. You can find it on old maps. There was this big storm one night and a high tide, and the river moved. It made a new channel, and by morning, Altmouth was gone." Dad put his hat down next to the radio. Mum daintily picked up some poached eggs, using her fork upside down, as the Queen would. "Did people drown? How many?" I tried to imagine it. In the middle of the night, the gale screaming in off the Irish Sea, driving the sand before it, raining perhaps. Darkness. Water bursting in, knocking down walls, carrying everything away. "How many? I don't know. It was long before we moved here, before they planted the pine woods to stabilize the Formby Dunes." Dad turned to Mum and said, "The excavator's taken off the big dunes already. Mr. M said he's going to stop it, one way or another." Dad lifted his cup of tea and inspected the brown tide marks. By Mr. M, Dad meant Joe Masterson, a scary guy who lived at the end of the close, in St. Stephen's Road, 3 doors away from the policeman. Joe had been shot in the throat during the war and used a mechanical device to speak, making him sound like Robbie the robot. "What does that mean, going to stop it?" Mum asked. "And don't look at me like that. I poured your tea at the usual time." I sat down. Dad said, "I don't know what it means, and I'd rather not know. The tea's cold." "What excavator, Dad?" I crammed the buttered toast and beans in my mouth. Oh, the amazing flavor of melted butter and beans and tomato sauce. The crunch of the toast. The excavator? A damn fool machine Rain Brothers built. It's out near the golf course, past the old fort. Taking the dunes from mortars to build houses, the coastal defenses. If the tide breaks through, the sea will flood everything as far as Ormsmark. Oh, so that was where they got the sand they used to build the bungalows where I played. One of my dens got bulldozed just last week. Immediately, I formed an intense hatred for Rains Brothers and their excavators. Mum caught me showing my anger on my face. You mind your own business, James. People have to live somewhere. Anyway, it's time to do your homework. Yeah, Mum. I shoved the rest of the toast and beans into my mouth, then, with cheeks like a squirrel, washed my plate. I'd have to talk to Den and Merv about the excavator. It must be a long way away. Past the golf course, miles and miles, I remember seeing the golfers from the trains on my journey to school. Groups of men, tiny in the distance, pulling around small carts, loonies. I put my plate in the drainer and dried my hands on a towel. Dad raised the newspaper to indicate that his end of the chat was over. The headline read, "Dock Strike Continues." I closed the kitchen door, leaving my parents to enjoy the horrible music, went into the lounge and picked up a phone. An eternity passed. Then the operator came on. Number, please. Crosby, 5071. Connecting you, caller. Some clicks and whirring sounds came down the line. Then, the ringing tone. Hello, Merv's mother. I recognized her Welsh accent straight away. Can I talk to Mervyn, please? He's doing his homework. Just a minute. She put the phone down and went away. In the background, I heard the sounds of a door being closed. Footsteps. Yeah? Merv's voice. Hey, it's Jim. Yeah, Mum said. You heard anything about an excavator? Somewhere out past the fort near the golf course? Nah. Did you ask then? Not yet. Well, hey, I finished the guitar. The bass? Merv was building a bass guitar all by himself since his parents refused to give him any money to buy one. He'd been saving his money for months to buy the metal parts. Devil music, his dad said. Yeah, course. I haven't got an amp, but I can hear it if I play it against the kitchen door. It makes the wood vibrate. Yeah. Can you play it yet? No, but I'm practicing. My fingers hurt. Got any ideas for Saturday? I lowered my voice in case my mom caught me trying out my Scouse accent. No, you? Was thinking of going to the fort, see if we could find the excavator. There'd be a lot of people working on it, won't there? Maybe not. Did they work on Saturdays? Mum and Dad both worked, but not on Saturday. Dunno. Have to talk to Den. Gotta go now. I heard a click, then the burring sound of the empty line. The operator broke in, startling me. Have you finished, caller? Yes. Thanks. Then please replace your receiver. I made a mess of my homework because I couldn't get the excavator out of my mind. Our village was built on sand. I imagined the sea rushing in, sand washing from under foundations, houses tipping, walls cracking, falling, horrible. Our house, though, was different from all the other houses in the close. Theirs had traditional foundations. Ours was built on top of a raft of reinforced concrete. Dad told the architect to design it that way. Maybe our house would float. Then I laughed at myself. The idea of concrete floating. The sea, rushing in as far as Ormsmark, would drown 10 miles of green fields and black and white cows and farmers, all of them in Gug's boat, heading toward the pierhead, screaming. Smaller and smaller. The phone rang. Mum answered it. After a moment, she came into the dining room where I sat with my dog-eared exercise books and log tables. It's Dennis. I walked into the lounge and picked up the phone. The plated cable had turned into a bunch of knots 10 inches long. I crouched on the floor and jammed the cold black Bakelite receiver to my ear. Yeah? That you, Jim? Yeah? I looked out the lounge window. I could barely make out the garden wall. Mum says I can't go out in this fog. It's too thick. Yeah, and it isn't even bonfire night. Merv rang. No way. We'll have to wait until next Saturday. Tomorrow, Sunday. There was no good because on Sundays, Mum and I visited Nana and Grandad. And it took over an hour to get there by train and bus. Yeah. Oh well. Heard the new single by the Flamingos? Shake Sherry? Yeah. Gear, isn't it? It's okay. I hadn't heard it yet. Dennis had an HMV record shop near his house. He spent hours in the listening booth with the headphones on. Only okay? Yeah, it's gear. I wanted to get off the subject. See you on Monday, then. Den and Merv were both in my classes at Waterloo Grammar. Yeah, right. Bye. I put the phone down before the operator could come in, demanding to know if I had finished. Why did my village have the only operator-controlled telephone system left in the country? My mother's budgie, Charlie, whizzed past my ear and perched on the standard lamp in the corner of the lounge. Budgie poo covered the lampshade. After a few moments of pulling at the fabric with his beak, Charlie flew down and strutted back and forth on the parquet floor. Doggle wandered in, saw Charlie at the floor level, and charged. Charlie waited until the last possible moment, then flew up, out of harm's way, and back to the lampshade for a triumphant poo, while Doggle, unable to stop on the polished parquet floor, slammed into the wall. Maybe someday the bird would be too slow. Hopefully, yes. Why did I think these bad thoughts? What had Charlie ever done to me? What a boring day. Bloody fog. I wandered into the kitchen and opened the door to the back garden. I'll be back in a minute. Where you going, James? Mum said from the sink, where she was removing my burnt-on beans with the Zim and the metal scoring pad. Do you see if your trains are running? Don't go too far now. She showed me the pan. Look, you've burnt the beans again. I closed the door behind me and sniffed the air. Dock leaves, Dad's compost heap, some poo left on the lawn by Doggle, and the rotten bits of the garden fence where it touched the soil. Our house was a good mile from the River Alt, but if the wind was in the right direction, we got a whiff. Dad said it smelled disgusting, but for me it was boiled cabbage, drains, cut grass, and damp soil all mixed up. I walked straight ahead until I found the garden fence, turned right, and followed it to the end of the garden, 30 yards to the east. Beyond was still a wild land. The fog made it seem as if I had cotton wool in my ears. I stood at the end of the garden, facing east, tracing my local landmarks in my imagination. On my left to the north, starting about 20 yards away, the remains of an old lime brick factory. Nothing more than foundation, really. Ahead, the rabbit warren, followed by a deep ditch. I had a den in there. Then more warren, and finally a chain-link fence and the railway line. I decided to see if the trains were running. I nearly fell down the ditch and twisted my ankle painfully. A terrible clatter made me jump. I looked up and saw a dim outline of a railway signal. It was at go, and a green light shone from within. The train slowly passed. A blurring line in the fog. Bang! I had heard this before, in fog. Dad said they put detonators on the tracks to warn the drivers to slow down. The fog seemed to be getting even thicker. I turned around and hobbled toward my house, but I couldn't find the ditch again. Surely I should have reached my house by now. Then I thought, suppose that train hadn't been coming from the north, but from the south? Maybe I had gotten turned around and hadn't realized it. A signpost loomed out of the fog, 2 small wooden boards fixed to a piece of galvanized channel jammed to the sandy ground. There was no signpost near my house. I must have gone in the wrong direction. I heard a dog barking. A Doggle? The barks floated towards me from a long way off. I started running that way, but found myself caught in a patch of reeds. The tall stems scratched my face, wet oozed onto my shoes. The barking stopped. My heart thudded, the sound magnified by the fog. No, it was a gentle flashing sound. The sour smell of the river made me sneeze. I was caught in the reeds of the riverbank, in the smelly, sucking mud.